This happened about 5 years ago, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched every night. It was a regular Thursday evening in late November. I had just moved into a new apartment on the outskirts of town, a charming little place with more character than I could have ever hoped for. Or so I thought. The building was old, probably early 1900s, and had this eerie charm to it. The landlord was an older gentleman named Mr. Johnson. He seemed kind enough, though he had a strange, almost too welcoming demeanor. He made sure I settled in, and I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just lonely. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the only other tenant on my floor was a woman named Emily. I never saw her much, just a few times in the hallway. She seemed nervous, always glancing over her shoulder and hurrying back to her apartment. One night I was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep. The room was pitch black, and the only sound was the faint ticking of my old wall clock. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a soft whisper. "Help me!" My eyes shot open, and I strained to hear more. Nothing. I chalked it up to my imagination and tried to go back to sleep. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Please, help me." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The voice was coming from the corner of my room. I reached over and flicked on the bedside lamp. The corner was empty, just shadows cast by the old wardrobe. I tried to convince myself it was just a draft or the old pipes, but then I heard it again, more desperate this time. "He's coming for me. Please." I jumped out of bed and searched the room, but there was no one there. I was wide awake now and utterly terrified. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed Emily's door was slightly ajar. I could hear her crying inside. Concerned, I knocked softly. "Emily, are you okay?" The crying stopped abruptly. There was a long pause before she whispered, "He's watching you too, isn't he?" A chill ran down my spine. "Who? Who's watching me?" She peeked through the crack in the door, her eyes wide with fear. "The man in the corner. He's been here for years. He watches us, waits for us to fall asleep. Then he takes us." I backed away slowly. This had to be some kind of joke. "Emily, that's not funny." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm not joking. He got the last tenant, too. Please, Wendy, you have to believe me." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I went to see Mr. Johnson. I told him about the voice and Emily's strange behavior. He just smiled and said, "Emily has always had an overactive imagination. Don't let it get to you." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. That night I stayed up, watching the corner of my room. Around 3 a.m., I felt a cold breeze, even though the windows were shut. Then I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving in the corner. It grew taller, more defined. My heart raced as the figure of a man emerged from the darkness. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He stepped closer, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Just as he reached out to touch me, I heard a loud banging on my door. The figure vanished. I stumbled to the door and flung it open. Emily stood there, pale and shaking. "Did you see him?" she whispered. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. "We have to leave," she said urgently. "Now." We packed our things and left that night. I moved back in with my parents and never returned to that building. I later learned that the apartment had a history of tenants disappearing under mysterious circumstances. To this day, I still see the man in the corner out of the corner of my eye, just for a split second. watching and waiting.